Christine Merle with the Social Emotional Learning Center at Children's Institute, and I'm back with you for module number 6 on decision making, and it is part B, our last one together. So let's jump off a little bit with a video as we look at Kid President as he begins to talk about choices. Take a few minutes to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed that. We're jumping back in with our topic on decision making. And oftentimes when I think about that idea of decision making, especially for our students, we really look at making decisions first off that only affect ourselves. And then we start to learn that, wow, our decisions really do impact those around us, widening that circle of concern. And then we start to look at how our decisions could possibly impact community and beyond. So today we're really going to be looking at the following objectives. Looking at our personal contribution, our effort, and our impact that we may have on our community, especially when we look at making decisions. And secondly, we want to look at examining our social and ethical responsibility to our community. If we are really looking at decision making in terms of that pebble in the water going out and having greater and greater reach, we really have to learn how to do some of that self-reflection. So the first activity I'm going to ask you to complete today, and I know it's uncomfortable for some of you, is to listen to a song and spend some time really reflecting. Now, if your facilitator chooses to have you reflect in a different way, that's fine. For those of you who are going to listen to the song, it is from the Disney movie Mulan, and it has to do with somebody's reflection. For those of you who are not going to listen to the song, the question that I'm going to ask you to think about is, when will my reflection show who I am inside? When you think about that in terms of a K-12 student or even beyond, that idea of, does the reflection that I see in the mirror actually mimic how I'm feeling about myself inside? So take a few minutes to either listen to the song or reflect on that question, and then I'm going to ask you to take it one step further. Okay, thank you for listening or reflecting on that question. I'm actually going to ask you to go one step beyond what we normally talk about. And we usually focus in terms of reflection on academic or behavior. Today, your reflection is going to focus on 3 different things, and they are your contribution, your effort, and the impact you have on your community. So your facilitator will actually give you a worksheet to take some time and actually think about your role within these 3 things. What is your contribution, what is your effort, and what is the impact on your community? I realize you can fill it in one of 2 ways. You can either look at it from a professional perspective or from a personal perspective. Your facilitator will help guide you through how you choose to reflect, or maybe how they want you to reflect today. Take a few minutes to complete that activity. I hope that allowed you to look at things a little bit differently. Let's take a second and think about it in terms of students. So if we were to ask students to evaluate themselves on those 3 factors as well, what would they say? Let's take a look at contribution. What do students see as their contribution to your class, to your school, to the greater community in which they live? When they look at effort, is it equitable? Do they exert the same amount of effort on their academic work as they do on their athletics or possibly musical efforts? Why would that inequity sometimes exist, and is it something that they've even thought about or been questioned about? That last one is a tough one for a lot of our students because they don't feel that they have any kind of impact on their community. So sometimes we just need to remind them that the classroom in which they exist right now is their community. And what is the impact their words, their voice, their thoughts, their actions? What is the impact that those things have on that beginning community, so that they can see that really we've got that pebble in the water effect. The stronger we build our communities on that classroom level, eventually it will hopefully start to impact our school systems as a whole, and then out from there. So how do we begin the conversation with our students in such a way that they begin to reflect on these 3 things? The first thing I'd like you to take a look at is the idea of reflective questioning. So asking students questions like, what were you most proud of today? Where did you struggle today, and what did you do about it? What part of your work brought you the most satisfaction today? What did you feel the best about? Who might benefit from what you learned today? And how did you help the class today? What was your contribution, effort, and impact on this class today? So using some of these questions as our prompt to get kids to start thinking about and reflecting on how they impact the community. It acknowledges for students that they do have power and they do have an impact on their immediate community as well as beyond that. A second reflection that you may want students to complete is the quick reflection. When we look at what those letters stand for, Q is that idea of questioning yourself, U, understanding how to get to your objective, if you've even really figured out what your objective is. I, inquiring of others, so actually seeking feedback from the other members of your community on your contribution, effort, impact, things like that. We're looking at C, completing it honestly, having those moments where you can really say to yourself, these are the things I really did well. This is where I may have drawn others off task today. And that last one of keeping a journal, teaching students a way of reflection in which they actually write down their thoughts and their feelings, and it helps them in that decision-making process. Having said that, then, we really want to talk about the power of journals. And I realize for some of your classroom content areas, you don't think a journal is a good fit. But there are so many ways that we can connect what students are thinking about or the struggles that they're having with the content that they're actually learning in your class. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do personally is called a double entry journal. In a double entry journal, you will have two sides to your piece of paper. The left side is your personal thoughts and reactions, and the right side is your key summaries. So you as the instructor can encourage students to write probably the right side in those key summaries first, although for some of your students it's actually going to be easier for them to write those personal feelings first. And then what they're supposed to do is to draw some arrows that connect the two. It actually will help with retention a little bit, as well as allowing students to see the areas in which they're struggling. Your facilitator is actually going to ask you to complete this using the information that we've talked about so far today. So the contribution, effort, impact that we talked about, possibly the Mulan reflection song, anything we've done so far in this module, so that you can have some key summaries, some feelings, and draw some arrows to connect the two. Take a few minutes to work on this activity. I know for some of you that activity probably was a little uncomfortable, while for some of you it felt quite natural. I know there are many teachers that find it normal to just sit and reflect on their thoughts and writing. And for some of you, that act of sitting and writing about something is somewhat painful for you. The same holds true for our students. However, we do see that journaling is one of the powerful ways to get kids to reflect in such a way that they actually continue to do it throughout their lives. It is one of those key skills that we can teach students that they can use for a lifetime to help them release some of their thoughts, some of their anxieties, to make a plan, think about consequences before they make an action. It really does help on so many levels. Having said that, then, there's one more piece to this journaling activity. We have a number of journal strategies posted for you that you may choose to use either daily or weekly or every other week, asking you to push that comfort zone just a little bit. You can take some notes possibly and write either the positives or negatives for each style and which one you think you might be able to modify for use in your classroom. So we'd like you to do a little bit of exploration. Those of you comfortable with journaling may find a new idea, and those of you not so much, try to figure out a way that it might work in your classroom. Take a few minutes to do that exploration. We use that opportunity to teach students about personal reflection, so they begin to make that relationship between their personal identity and their values, and that impacts their ability to make decisions, like that pebble in the water, as they go out farther and farther. When we started this work way back in Module 1, the intro, which seems like a long time ago, we talked about the idea that we wanted to produce students that were good, productive, self-sufficient, and responsible members of society who in turn gave back to the society and the community in which they live. So we're at that point now. How are they going to give back to the community in which they live? And what kind of ethical and social responsibility do they feel to their community and to the larger setting in which we live? As we look at social responsibility, we have a video that one teacher used in her classroom in order to start the conversation with students about what they were interested in terms of social responsibility. It represents 40 of the most powerful social issue ads, and I hope you can take a few minutes and see which clips actually spark a little emotion in you. Did any of those issues strike a chord with you and make you feel some emotion? For this teacher, her students watched that video and started to realize what things really motivate them. Were they interested in the animal ads? Were they interested in the texting and driving or smoking or pollution? And it began to refine for them some of that sense of identity and the things that I really care about, especially when I look at the impact I can have on my community. Now, having said that, let's take a look at some of those ideas that come along with social responsibility. The first one is related to the idea of cultural competence. Those are the words that I hear bandied about so frequently lately. However, I went to a different workshop with a different presenter, and instead of using the words cultural competence, they used the words cultural humbleness. And I thought it was such a great framing. The more we know, the more we realize how little we know. That idea of really being culturally humble and realizing that we can't make stereotypes on any of our students or anybody that we meet based on the things we think about a culture. That idea of realizing how little I know about a culture, but keeping myself open to the learning that could take place. Sometimes we jump to those service learning projects because we make some broad generalizations and stereotypes about the type of person that we're helping. I just want to keep my students in that mindset of cultural humbleness. How little do we actually know? The second thing I want you to think about is the definition of social responsibility. We're including a great article on teaching children social responsibility responsibly. And it really relates to the idea that so often we're asking students to look at enormous issues, and they are small little people. They don't necessarily feel that they can affect big change, and in some cases they may not be able to, yet. However, what are the changes they can affect? Locally, where I live, some students in a neighborhood suburb realized that their food pantry had a lot of food for humans, but no food for pets. They realized then that there probably is a need for pet food just as much as there is a need for people food. So they added a whole wing onto their nearby food bank so that people could get food for their pets as well as food for themselves. That's social responsibility within their community. I wonder how many of those students will take that little bit of social responsibility they felt and the success in this program and go on to do farther and bigger work. That pebble in the water effect yet again. The last one, because if I didn't talk about it in every module, you would be bored. It is that idea of the power of choice. It is very difficult to put service learning projects on students without them actually believing in the cause in which they're serving. So allowing kids some choice. What are you interested in? Who do you think we could serve? Are there areas which we do feel a certain responsibility? And starting small, possibly community-based, and then reaching out from there. When we give students that chance to make those authentic choices and say, this is what I'm really interested in, their motivation tends to go up, the follow-through tends to get up, you're not nagging anybody to complete the project, and they really feel that sense of accomplishment, contribution, effort, and that they impacted their community. So what are some strategies we can use to start those social responsibility conversations? Some of you may be able to use that video to start it, maybe not. What are other things we can use? In some classrooms, teachers use quotes. So you may have a quote of the week. Kids may actually use that in their journal to reflect upon how it affects themselves, the classroom, the school, and so on. In some cases, you may want to use movies. There may be clips or entire movies that you could show that teach kids the power of social responsibility. I know one classroom that looked at the movie Blackfish and the harvesting of killer whales, and those students actually, for an ELA project, started to write letters to places like SeaWorld, explaining how dismayed they were by these practices. social responsibility on a scale that those students could handle, but showing that they wanted to have some impact on their community. For those of you that do teach ELA or humanities and history, you may be able to choose novels and short stories that actually teach kids some of those social responsibility lessons, or at least start the conversation. So when I look at things like the Hunger Games or the lottery, what are the conversations we can have with students about ethical responsibility and choices and consequences? And what are the metaphors that those books and short stories stand for in today's society? All right, so here's your pebble in the water moment. I'm going to ask you to think about three things. Number one, what does social responsibility look like for you? And do you feel any sense of it professionally at work, personally in your home life? Then I want you to take a look at what does social responsibility look like in your classroom? And step three, what does social responsibility look like in your school? And start to think about it on that grander scale of how we have contribution, effort, and impact on your community. Your facilitator will guide you a little bit in this discussion. Maybe you'll make a few plans or a time to meet again to create some plans, but take a couple minutes to think about those three questions. All right, now we've reached closure for all 6 modules, and I'm really hoping you have time for this activity. I do it frequently in my classroom, and I find that kids have so much material once they are prompted and are actually really asked to dig for it. So I'm going to ask you to complete a competency carousel. You should have 6 pieces of paper around the room, an intro, and one for each competency. And you and your group should be given a color marker. That's your visibility, so we know which group to cheer for or laugh at. Just kidding, later. What you're going to be asked to do is to report to a board without your notes and write everything that you can possibly remember about that competency on that board in your color. Your facilitator will let you know when it's time to move on to the next board. At the second board, you read what's there and you must add some more information. It is amazing by the time you make it all the way around to that 6th board how much has been added once you left and you thought there could be nothing left to say. People's examples and stories and what they picked out as the most important strategies often surprise me when they show up on those boards. So I really hope you have time to spend on this competency carousel. I hope that carousel helped you sum up some of the things that you've learned in these 12 modules of us working together. Please know that we are here to support you in any way as you continue on your journey towards social emotional learning and developing these competencies in yourself as well as your students. You can find us online at the Social Emotional Learning Center at Children's Institute. And thank you so much for your time, your attention, and your participation.